welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna and I want to talk about how I finished the Miami Marathon as a novice runner. So let's start from the very beginning. I got into running because it was one of those sports I just always wanted to get into, but I always told myself I am not a land sport person. In high school, I swam all 4 years and I just considered myself much more comfortable in the water. Before I got my very first pair of running shoes, I had never run more than probably 2 miles. It just wasn't going to be done. I thought I was not physically capable of doing that. I started running when I got my first pair of running shoes. This was my very first running shoe that I purchased. It is the Brooks Levitate GTS, and I got it in a size 5.5. 5.5 is my true fit, and these were the first pair of shoes that I ran my first 5 miles in, and that actually ended up being my first run in these shoes as well.
I now suggest getting at least a half size larger than your true fit if you plan to run long distances in your shoes, because as you run, your feet will swell.
Fun fact, it was actually the most expensive pair of shoes I had ever purchased in my life. For me, making that financial investment was the push and the lock that I needed to actually start running, to actually get myself off whatever else I was doing and actually going outside, putting on those shoes and getting out there. The way that I started to introduce consistent running into my life, I would try to get at least 1 run in a week. I want to do either this amount of distance or I want to do this amount of time. More often than not, I was running for time. It took the pressure off me to feel like I really needed to push myself or exert myself or overexert myself if maybe I wasn't feeling it. So I kind of worked my way up to running about 45-minute durations every time I would go on a run, and that was kind of my minimum. That would put me at about 4 to 4.5 miles. I am just a naturally competitive person, and so as I'm starting to get these runs in, I'm starting to see my mileage go up. I'm kind of wondering, okay, what's next? Like, how can I challenge myself in this? Every time the marathon is always going to come up. And at this point in my life, I'm not thinking a marathon is humanly possible, considering how I feel after I run 6 miles. At the same time, I'm seeing all these people having had done it. All these people are getting crazy times, and you're looking at the world records and these sub 2-hour marathoners, and I just thought it was so cool. And so I wanted to be like that. Then I'm thinking about the marathon, and I'm going on runs later in the evening, and I hit my 5 miles and I tell myself, okay, I'm gonna go 1 more mile. And so then I do 6, and then I tell myself at 6 I'm still feeling pretty good, I'm not overexerted, I'm gonna go 1 more mile. And so then I reached 7 miles. It was at that point when I realized 1 more mile is not going to break you. The idea and the goal of a marathon, it started to kind of feel a bit more attainable. Still an insane goal, but it felt more attainable because I had finally got to that point where it's not about the total miles so much is it about when you are running, being able to go just a little bit further. That's kind of where I was when I had decided I was going to run a full marathon. Probably are wondering, okay, why did I do a marathon instead of doing a half marathon? There's a couple of reasons why I did that. One, my personality, I'm always going to go big or go home. Second is there's the financial component. So full and the half marathon are very similarly priced. They are pretty much like $20 or $40 different in your entrance fee. Doing the full marathon is more bang for your buck, especially if you don't live in the city that the marathon is being hosted in. And I don't live in Miami, so we had to make a road trip out of it, which was super fun, but it's kind of expensive, especially if you are younger and you aren't well developed in your career and you might not have a bunch of disposable income. The cost of the marathon itself is pricey. The travel cost, the equipment that you would need to purchase, which would be a pair of shoes, and possibly even 2 pairs of shoes, depending on how much you're training. The amount that I trained, I actually did need 2 pairs of shoes, as well as the kind of maintenance cost of some of the things that you're constantly needing, such as gels or chews. That can also add up. So running, I would say, is one of the cheaper sports that you can get into, but that's not to say that it is cost-free, because there's definitely still costs that come with wanting to train and run a marathon. Another reason why we chose the Miami Marathon was because out of a lot of the marathons that you hear of, they have qualifying times. If you don't have a qualifying time, and if you also have never run even close to a marathon, more than likely you're not going to qualify, and you also don't really know. The Miami Marathon, they don't have qualifying times. What they give you is 7 hours maximum to complete the marathon, and if you don't reach the half marathon mark in 3.5 hours, then you cannot complete the full marathon. That was another reason why we chose the Miami Marathon. It's beginner friendly, but also it's still a marathon. Those were the considerations that pushed me to want to do the full marathon instead of the half marathon. So now talking about training. I started marathon training on September 1st, 2023. But before I started my program, I ran a half marathon on my own. When I did it, it happened. It was very painful. It was the most I had ever run. Up until that point, I had only gone up to 7 miles. I used the Nike Run Club app, which is free. I highly recommend Nike Run Club to any runner that wants to do any sort of running. Not only is it a great app for tracking all of your runs and all of your mileage and your pace and your cadence and all these other really fun metrics to kind of dig into. They have guided and non-guided runs, and the guided runs are with running professionals in this sport that are in your ear, and they are non-judgmentally training you and pushing you, and it's done in a very non-overwhelming way. So I loved the Nike Run Club app for my marathon training, and they even have an 18-week marathon training for beginners, and that's exactly the training program that I used, and it was free, because that's another cost that might sneak up on you, is having to pay for a training program. And I just feel like it's such a good resource for anybody who doesn't really know that much about running or the running world, and who just wants to get exposure to it, because they don't treat you like a novice runner. They just treat you like somebody that they can help, and that's really what it is. I used Nike Run Club 18 weeks out marathon training program for beginners. Just time-wise, it doesn't really make sense, because I started training on September 1st and my marathon was January 28th. So I was actually more than 18 weeks out, but I can get kind of anxious, and so I don't like feeling like things are perfectly on the dot for time, because what if something goes wrong? Like, what if I needed a little bit more time? What if I missed a long run? When my training started, I also made a few dietary changes just to really ensure that I was giving myself the best possible chance of completing this marathon. I wanted to make sure I did everything I possibly could to make sure that I crossed that marathon finish line, even if I was crawling, within the 7-hour time frame. Dietary things that I did was I cut out alcohol, I cut out added sugar, so I kept in fruits and dairy. It kind of forced me to not go for the pastries and the cakes, some of my favorites. On that last month, I also decided to go plant-based, and that was really just to ensure that I didn't carry any excess weight on the run. I was treating myself like I was an elite athlete, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it. I realized I really took it pretty far, but I'm happy that I did, because honestly, I was very nervous that I might not finish. It's what I wanted to do, to make sure that I was not only treating my body right, training, but I was also fueling my body right. Remember how I said I started the training program early? Well, that meant I also finished the training program early, and the last race they have you do is, of course, the marathon. And so I get to the last week, and by the end of the training, you've tapered most of your mileage. So you're not doing really long runs at all. You're just kind of maintaining and doing recovery runs. And then your last run is the marathon. I finished that program without finishing the marathon. I finished that a month before the race. And part of me felt happy and relieved, like, okay, I just got through the 18-week marathon training program. One thing that I'm very proud of myself, I never missed a run, and there's 5 runs a week, and it's 18 weeks. I did, however, shorten some of the runs because you cannot guarantee for 18 weeks that you are gonna want and feel like running 5 days a week. That is some of the beauty of the marathon, is all of that training that you're doing and all of the sacrifices that you're making. I was listening to this podcast called Marathon Training for Beginners, and they had interviewed an individual, and they described the marathon as the celebration. This is your time to celebrate because all the hard work has already been done. And so I'm kind of at this point. I finished the marathon training and I'm a month out from the race, and to me, that anxiety is building up again, like, oh, I can't just stop running for a month. I had already planned to stop running a week before the marathon just to really make sure I didn't get any injuries. But now I'm like, okay, what do I do for 3 weeks? Also, the marathon training, they stop you at 20 miles, and I had kind of really wanted to do a 22 miler just to make sure, because 20 to 26.2, that last 10K, a lot of runners say that's where the race actually begins. That's where a lot of people will hit the wall. That's where it's very, very mentally and physically demanding that you stay in the game, because you've been doing it for up to 20 miles and now you have 6.2 miles left. And yes, maybe you've already run multiple 10Ks, but that last 10K is going to be the worst 10K of the race, most likely, especially if you're a beginner, especially if this is your first marathon. After having gone through 18 weeks of Nike's marathon training program, I kind of started to get a feel for the formula of the runs and the way that we were building the distance and the running base, because that's essentially the whole point of marathon training, is to build your running base. Especially as a beginner, I don't think focusing on pace is as beneficial for you as it is to just focus on building a base, focus on increasing your mileage every single week. I took it upon myself, once I completed the 18 weeks training with Nike, to basically extend it. I gave myself a 22-mile run, and then 2 weeks out I did a half marathon. Both of those runs, they were chef's kiss. They were probably some of my best runs in my career. Those runs, like, they gave me a lot of confidence for the marathon. That last week, I just pretty much didn't run at all. And then I went to Miami and I completed the marathon. Because the race itself was such a unique and insane experience, honestly, I can't use any other word to describe it. I probably would want to do a whole separate video on just me talking about the marathon, but I really just wanted to focus on how I, as a novice runner, was able to even get through the training and then the completion of a marathon. I hope that was interesting, and I hope that made you feel like, if you yourself are starting to get into running and you might not even feel like you can call yourself a runner, I just want this video to be a testament to the fact that you really can. You can do it. So that is going to be the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video or learned anything from it, please let me know. If you want to hear more about my experience, and if you have any other questions, I am more than happy to answer them. Thank you so very much for sitting here and listening with me. The more I think about it, the more it just feels so crazy that happened and then I did that, and then I can even sit here and make a video like this. Thank you again, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!